there. I just wanted to give you some video feedback again on some of your great comments and insights on our discussion board post regarding culture. In no particular order, just as I jotted them down as I was reading your posts. I was just thinking about food and how often we can use food, especially in math, like Hershey bars, as we think about fractions, things like that. We do need to be mindful that in some culture, food used in activities like these, and not as something to be eaten, might be frowned upon. So just be wary of that. Some of us talked about how difficult it might be to learn all the nuances of the many different cultures we are so fortunate to have in our classrooms. And that is so true. I am always learning about culture. I think it's just a never-ending range of possibility for us. And I think if our attitude is one of, help me learn about your culture, that does come through to students and their families. Some of you also talked about families not being able to attend conferences or might be no-shows for conferences. And some of you did note that these families might feel intimidated by the school or might feel that it is the school's job to educate, and that by being there, they might be sending the message that they didn't trust us somehow. And that can be very true in some cultures. I remember speaking with a Cambodian lady who lived just a couple hundred yards away from her school, and she never really set foot inside the school where her children attended. But she did at times try and peek through the windows because she wanted to know what was going on. I think that we also talked a lot about the drawing. This is an issue that's near and dear to my heart because, like many of you noted, I was one of those teachers too who was, write your story and then you can draw the picture, like it was a big reward for having written the story, that you get to draw your picture now. And then I finally was able to understand that when we give students of all ages a chance to draw, maybe in early elementary school, or we can use the word sketch for older students, their stories become richer and more replete with details. And especially when they can take those stories, show them to a partner or a friend, and have them explain their drawing or sketch to the friend. This, of course, encourages good oral language skills too. Sometimes I take a piece of paper and divide it into 3s or 4s for the first, next, then, and last part of the story, and have students draw out their story in that way before writing. As I mentioned to some of you, for our older students, introducing them to graphic novels and having them look at that, what we might call cartoon format in books, is helpful, because then they know that drawing is not kind of a baby activity. Some of you, I was so pleased to read your comments that our English language learners should not just be thought of as the ELLs, but we need to think of these English learners as individuals, not just as a group, because not everyone from even the same country is the same. I know in my hometown of Marquette, Michigan, not everyone is the same. We're all different here too, up in the woods where I am. So I think that's important. Some of you also discussed the family relationships and the close relationships that many of our English learners have. One of my first English learners, a little girl from Thailand named Nam Ton, once she finally got past the silent period, was constantly talking about her sister back in Thailand. I was very confused by this until her dad, who spoke English, finally explained to me that this was her cousin, but because the family relationships are so strong, they were thought of as sisters. And I think this is important. Um, Many of you mentioned the importance of finding appropriate books that reflect that there are mirrors to the children in your classroom. As I was reading some of your posts, I thought about a wonderful book I discovered last year called My Librarian is a Camel. If you haven't read this, please check it out. There was quite some discussion about home visits. I'm not quite sure how I feel about this even at this point, and I think we all have to do what's best for our communities and our situation. Many of you noted that you were going to try and do a better job in the beginning of the year, even if you don't make a home visit, of finding out more about your students, about their funds of knowledge. And we mentioned trying to send a letter home in their own language. Families might even feel comfortable sending in photos to explain these kinds of things. Just one last comment. I just happened to read somebody's talking about the Vietnam War, and here's a great example, because I called it the Vietnam War. I still do, for years and years, because that's what we call it in the United States. But when we were working, my husband and I were working in Southeast Asia and working with Vietnamese, they called it the American War. And so it all depends on perspective. Thanks for your great comments. Thanks for stimulating some good ideas in me, and I appreciate your work.